Donald Trump continues to threaten to withdraw the US from NATO, and all his officials claim that it is absolutely unreasonable for the US to remain in the alliance. But in Europe, these threats are not believed, and the very mechanism for a country to leave the alliance indicates that neither Trump nor his officials can decide this issue on their own. Only Congress, and only by an absolute majority, can make such a decision. And now experts say that despite all the threats and the anger of US President Donald Trump over the Allies' refusal to help with the military campaign in Iran, his rhetoric about leaving the alliance so far shows no signs of any concrete actions. That's what we're going to discuss with you now, so we can understand what's really happening. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start this episode, I'd ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and leave any comment you like. And be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link is in the description of this video. So, Trump is once again threatening to pull the US out of NATO, but in Europe, people don't really believe it. NATO diplomats, congressional aides, and defense officials say that the Trump administration has not held the necessary talks to withdraw from the alliance. According to two NATO diplomats quoted by Politico, the US hasn't even started any debates, and they haven't issued any specific directives regarding Washington's role in it. Also, according to a senior Senate aide, the Trump administration hasn't informed Capitol Hill about the upcoming withdrawal from the alliance or pulling troops out of Europe. And at the Pentagon, they noted that the topic of the US leaving NATO is being kept quiet within the department, so all the officials conclude that Trump's words are just another bluff. Besides, it's important to understand that the path to leaving NATO will be filled with legal obstacles. In addition, this process will likely provoke outrage from congressmen who support the alliance, who claim that President Donald Trump is required to comply with the law passed in 2023, which demands a two-thirds majority in the Senate before the US can leave NATO. Once again, in other words, it's an absolute bluff. A majority in the Senate must vote in favor, and then the process of leaving the alliance begins. And here's the irony. The co-author of that very law about the two-thirds majority, which sets such a threshold in the Senate, is Marco Rubio, the current US Secretary of State, who supports Trump. And in 2023, he was the co-author of this law. And before this law, the same issue could be resolved by a simple majority. That is, 51 votes. And that's it. There was no need for two-thirds. As Politico writes, some allies who watched as Trump used American influence when he considered the possibility of annexing Greenland and demanded that Europeans buy American weapons are wondering whether his comments are actually an attempt to get help in ending Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. According to another NATO diplomat, Trump's rhetoric was meant to force action. NATO allies to take certain visible actions, particularly assistance from France and the United Kingdom in his war. According to the first official, Trump's threat seemed like another bluff and fit the pattern of the US increasing pressure on Europe during any crisis. But Trump's latest rhetoric about America's participation in NATO was extreme even by his standards. As Trump himself stated, quote, "I would say that this is not subject to reconsideration. NATO has never influenced me. I always knew they were a paper tiger." Interestingly, just a few hours after Trump's interview was released, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, who is one of Donald Trump's key European friends, stated that he immediately called the US president after the interview and had, quote, "a constructive conversation with him." He said everything's fine. I talked to him. He just got a bit carried away. Nevertheless, the White House continued to insist that, quote, "President Trump clearly expressed his disappointment with NATO and other allies." And as the president emphasized, the United States will remember this. Interestingly, President Trump's latest statement prompted a swift response, in particular a bipartisan statement from Republican Senator Mitch McConnell and Democratic Senator Chris Coons. They categorically stated that the United States will remain in NATO and called the alliance the most successful defense pact in history. This indicates that Congress will never support such an adventure by Trump. Other leading US lawmakers pointed to the restrictions they have put in place, which require those very two-thirds votes in the Senate. Or does a separate act of Congress need to be issued for the US to withdraw from NATO? Here's what Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says. Let me remind you again, 2/3. Right now, yes. Republicans hold the majority in the Senate, but they still need an additional, how many is it? 16 or 17 Democratic votes. Here's Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer speaking. I can promise you the Senate will not vote to leave NATO and abandon our allies just because Trump is upset that they won't agree with his reckless choice of war. And even former officials from the Trump administration were surprised that the White House tried to force NATO countries to cooperate in the context of the US-Israeli war in Iran. After this, same Trump had demanded that they take more responsibility for the defense of their own continent. A former Trump administration official noted that after a year of hammering Europeans with the phrase that they need to do more in Europe itself, now is the worst possible time. To then come and say, actually, now we're just going to abandon this whole project, meaning NATO. Well, even some Republicans have said that this seems like a dangerous political gamble. Next, I'll quote Republican Congressman Don Bacon. If Trump really intends to pull us out of NATO, I think his presidency will never recover from it. Republicans also won't be able to rebuild a winning team at the national level for several upcoming election cycles. Of course, we can imagine a scenario where Trump makes such a decision himself, disregarding the law and Congress just stays silent. That could happen too. But even if Congress doesn't take action, Trump could end up losing in a court case. The law clearly prohibits a unilateral withdrawal from the North Atlantic Treaty. This is the fundamental document of NATO. And this will put the Trump administration in a difficult position in appellate cases if Democrats lead the effort or if any US citizens with business interests in Europe decide to file a lawsuit. Don't forget that yes, if, for example, some American has a huge business in Europe, and he built it based on the fact that Americans once promised Europeans protection back in 1949, then this citizen can file a lawsuit and say, listen, so where is the protection of our interests? That's why European officials are concerned that Trump might try a different approach, meaning he could stay in the alliance but deprive NATO of high-level attention and military resources. They are afraid that Trump's rhetoric has already made NATO meaningless. And as one official from Germany stated, and I quote, with Trump in power, NATO has no value at all. Maybe we have NATO, but we no longer have an alliance. We're just biding our time, but the losses are huge. Well, in a separate episode I already talked about this. I explained how in Europe they started secretly forming separate alliances, which could eventually become a replacement for the North Atlantic Alliance. So, if you haven't watched it, go to the channel and be sure to check it out. I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would really appreciate it. You can do this with any donation, a monetary gift. Subscriptions or sponsorships can be made through the links and details in the description of this video. It says there, support Alexei Peci's channel. Choose any format that's convenient for you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.